Dark City is a film that I wanted to get to for a long time. I was about to make a joke, but I better not. The film begins at midnight. Now, I did analysis of this a long time ago, but it really needed to be updated. It was a subpar analysis I wrote many, many years ago when my writing was pretty crappy, and now my writing is just mediocre. So definitely don't go back and read my 10-year-old analysis of Dark City. Alex Proyas explains, I think, if I recall in my analysis, that he does utilize Gnostic ideas when he writes his films. And this is no exception. The film is clearly, totally, 100% Gnostic. But reviewing the film many years later, once again, I noticed a whole crux of things that I've never seen before. The film begins at midnight. We see the circular creeper symbol, which symbolizes, of course, later on, the circular city, which is in fact a giant simulation of sorts. It's a giant test tube. Now, that symbol is curious because not only is it's concentric sixes, so we could see concentric 666 within that symbol, it's also something that suggests the Ouroboros, right? It's a never-ending circle, a never-ending spiral that traps you in a flat plane that's circular, almost like Matthew McConaughey, right? In True Detective. That's exactly what you ever thought about yourself being stuck inside of a flat plane that just keeps going in a circle? We're all stuck inside. So he does this Nietzschean thing of eternal return, right? That's present here. That's an analogy, an allegory for our world being stuck in this kind of flat plane circle, unable to get into higher dimensions or whatever you want to call it. So there's a matrix synthetic reality to this film, and that's pretty evident. I think this film clearly had an influence on the Matrix. There's no denying that. There's a lot of elements of the Matrix when you go watch this movie. You can see that they're present. Its setting is ambiguous in terms of time frame, which is a clue actually to what's going on. Is it the 40s? We see Art Deco. We see noir. It's neo-noir, right? When is this taking place? We can't really tell. And we see our hero, our protagonist, Rufus Sewell, wakes up in a bathtub. Don't really want to see Rufus Sewell taking a bath with his booty running around, but we do. And we see that imagery of an awakening. It's like a birth, right? Coming out of the birthing waters. It's an awakening. This also seems to come up in a lot of videos, a lot of esoteric stuff related to ritual bath. It's a kind of baptism, you could say. And so with Rufus, John Murdoch, he's awake. He's woke. He's one of the awakened ones. And we see that as he gets out of the bathtub, he's not only nude because he's newly born, his third eye is bleeding. So, because he's been injected, right, by Spurgy Kiefer Sutherland, right, who's basically an MK Ultra doctor in this film. So we see the imagery of the broken glass when the fishbowl falls, if you remember that, and it breaks. That's usually a symptom or a symbol of it's a Zen symbol of foreboding and death, and it's like a dark omen, right? But his paradigm has been shattered. He's out of this matrix now. Rufus is awake. Everyone else is asleep. John Murdoch's awake. And then we see these men in black, right? These creepy men in these pale, pasty powder men in black looking dudes who are chasing him down, right? And so they kind of remind us of government agents, but they seem to be a little bit more than that, right? Because they almost have they're Archons, basically, to use the Gnostic scheme, right? They have these powers beyond just, mortal powers. They can float around, right? Mary Poppins style. And then we see the Dr. Schreiber character, who is basically an MK Ultra doctor, right? I mean, he's not just an MK Ultra doctor. He also has the ability to re-imprint memories, to wipe people's memories, right? We figure out that he's the one that has injected John Murdoch through the third eye to wake up, right? So Schreiber is this kind of rebel character who we think works for the bad guys because they've forced the Archons, forced the strangers, they're called, forced Spurger Kieferland to work for them. So we later find out, spoiler alert, right, he has awakened Murdoch. But I just want to stress that it's pretty shocking, actually, the degree to which he really kind of matches up to somebody like Dr. Ewan Cameron or somebody like Dr. John C. Lilly, right? These doctors who, I'm not saying those were good guys, right? Because actually the Kiefer Sutherland character is a good guy in the film, but in the real world, those guys weren't really good guys at all, right? Like dolphin creepers, right? But there's something unique about John Murdoch, right? He's the one. And that's evident when we look at John Murdoch's fingerprint. He has the spiral on his fingerprint. And this, again, spiral signifies that not only that he's the one, but we later find out that this is a giant experiment. It's a giant test tube. It's a giant lab to force, through environmental pressures, evolutionary development. And that's what happens. There is an evolutionary development, and it's John Murdoch, right? Kiefer Sutherland character later explains that that's what's going on. John Murdoch actually is evolving through these environmental pressures to have the abilities of the strangers, right? Who are these alien entities that possess the pale, pasty frame of powder. If you've seen that ridiculous movie, Powder. Sometimes the imprinting, he says, doesn't work, but actually that was the cover that Dr. Schreiber had going the whole time to wake John Murdoch up. We find out that the ability that they have is to direct will and intention to cause stuff to move and float around, right? And you see this 90s CGI that comes out when they will something to happen from their third eyes. John Murdoch has developed this ability, right? He's evolving and he's got the tuning. That's interesting because the idea of tuning and frequencies kind of matches up with some occult and esoteric traditions who believe that everything that exists is existing at a level of vibration or frequency, right? Up to higher levels that we can't see, down to the levels that we can see, and then down to lower levels that subatomic or whatever. If everything is vibrating, then if you could, in a Tesla sense, right, like get it at the right frequency, then you're Mariah Carey and you could sing and you can bust glasses, right? Or you can sing somebody's name and bust their head. If I sing your frequency, I could bust you. Like you would pop. Now, the strangers have curious names that I think identify them with objects. Mr. Book, Mr. Hand, Mr. Quick. Objects, right? They don't have actual consciousness in the sense of creativity. They're purely a hive mind Borg that's trying to study humans for how and why humans are created. And the Archons also take a lot of imagery from Metropolis, right? First Lines Metropolis, everything in the underworld where they rule things is just like Metropolis, right? And they have this giant machine that they can speak into and tune through their minds that forms the city. And every night at midnight, they reform and change the matrix, the synthetic world, to be something else. And they'll even alter everybody's lives and kind of change the past so that nobody remembers what they did or who they were. And one day you could be married to Lil Wayne. The next day you're married to Bill Cosby and you don't even know, right? You can't help it. Even if you truly love Bill Cosby, now you're married to Lil Wayne. You can't help it. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to have to evolve and get the powers of tuning like John Murdoch. And this tuning is actually also an esoteric concept of direct will and intention, not through like bodily means, but like telepathy, right? So it's this developing these psychic powers as part of evolution. And we meet the crazy conspiracy theorist character, right? This guy who's like always anybody drawing scribbles on walls automatically is the conspiracy theorist. There's only two things that conspiracy theorists do in movies, which is scribble all over the wall. And like, if you're a conspiracy theorist, can you not write on paper anymore? Why do you have to scribble on the wall? And the other thing that every movie conspiracy theorist does is use giant strings of yarn and push pins and tack everything up with connecting it all with yarn. Stop using so much damn yarn and stop scribbling on walls. But of course, he scribbled the spiral onto the wall, and he's realized that all of reality is an illusion, man. We live inside an illusion, man, right? So this illusion, he's woke, right? He's the other guy who's woke, but he can't handle it, so he goes nuts, right? So he's filtered out of this social Darwinian scheme. He's not fit to survive because the guy's nuts, and he kills himself. But he tells John Murdoch before he does this, "You've got it, bro. You figured it all out. It's all fake. We live in this synthetic environment," which is true to a degree, right? The world is kind of a synthetic environment. The strangers are also related to Saturn and Kronos. They have a connection to the dominance of time. They can alter and control time. They can't control everything, but they have kind of these limited demigod status powers where they can control time. They can freeze time and come and re-imprint people and this kind of stuff. But they are Saturnian, you could say, right? And they even kind of wear all black, right? And they have their machine is a giant clock, right? So we're definitely supposed to connect them to Saturn and to Kronos. And the mythos of this world that you're trapped in is Shell Beach. Everybody wants to get to Shell Beach. And isn't there something almost exactly like this in Truman Show? It's very interesting that in this mid to late 90s period, you had the 13th floor, you had Truman Show, you have Dark City, Matrix, and at least in three of these, right, the first three, you're trying to get to the beach. or in the case of Truman, I mean, isn't he trying to just leave and sail to the other side of the island or whatever, right? Which he's got the fear of sailing. Here we're trying to get to Shell Beach. And what it is, we don't even know what Shell Beach is. Nobody can remember where it is or how to get there because everybody's stuck in their, metropolitan shitty job, right? And we find out that the next note I have is that Dr. Schreiber has the ability to alter people's DNA to deal with their traumas or give them traumas through altering their genetic makeup and even implant into them, again, fake memories. And we find out that the strangers are actually aliens who have abducted all these people, put them into a giant floating flat Earth map. Right here come all the flat Earth. Flat Earth, bro. Proof from Dark City, right? And everybody's been at midnight they get repatterned and repurposed, and then the giant head underground, the giant Borg head, is the machine that is controlling everybody, right? So it's kind of like John Carpenter a little bit too. So the part that is the most interesting, which I've noticed in a few films, and I want to get your comments on this because you guys are always great in the comments. The Neptune. There's the curious phase in John Murdoch's awakening where he has to cross the abyss. That's my take on this. I'm not sure exactly what this relates to, but if you think about Back to the Future, if you read my Back to the Future analysis, you know that when Marty goes to the Neptune, the dancer of the sea, he has a phase of having to confront his inner world and fears and traumas, and Neptune appears. Same thing happens with John Murdoch. He has to go to the movie theater, and it's very clearly Neptune. There's aquariums everywhere. And that's when he meets the old, boomer uncle or whatever who's just sitting around watching movies, if you remember that scene, right? And he says, "Who's my dad? Tell me the truth." And the uncle's like, "I don't know who your dad is. I can't remember, but he's on Shell Beach." He said, "How do I get to Shell Beach?" I don't know. I forgot, right? So my take is that there's a phase in the awakening process of these people in these esoteric films where they have to confront the abyss, the ocean, right? Neptune is the key to that. And at the same time, we have to remember that this floating city is out in the real abyss of space, right? Floating around. It's not a real city. It's a ship. but it's supposed to be likened to Earth as well, right? Earth is a ship floating through space that we all inhabit a kind of synthetic environment, right? In terms of modernity and consumerism, right? We're supposed to make all those analogies as well. The world in this movie is our world, right? Are we just like the experiment of aliens, man? Earth is like a flying shit, and we're just experimented on by the puppeteer. Remember in Cabin in the Woods, puppeteers, right? That's kind of the same idea here, right? So water, Neptune, this is a phase in his initiatory process. And then he moves beyond this, becomes a Ubermensch of sorts. Interestingly, the strangers take a guy and he undergoes an incarnation. So it's like a reverse Gnosticism version of the incarnation, where the guy who becomes incarnate, one of the strangers, loses his powers, but he's doing this to try to figure out the thought process and to try to stop John Murdoch. And eventually they catch John Murdoch, but when they bring John Murdoch down to the realm of the underworld, this is like kind of like the katabasis or the descent of Christ into Hades. This ends up not working, and John Murdoch can then go down there and destroy the realm of Hades, right? But remember, this is a Gnostic telling of the Christ story and his descent into Hades, so everything is reversed, right? The Archon stranger who becomes incarnate is the bad guy, and he's actually cruciform when he becomes incarnate. Remember, they imprint him with the human structure and DNA and powers and abilities, so he loses his divinity in this sense, and he tries to chase down Murdoch, right? And they eventually kill the William Hurt character, and they eventually kill Schreiber. No, does Schreiber die? No, he doesn't die, but he gets paralyzed, and he has to like roll around in that giant like baby crib where he's walking around. It's pretty funny, but looks ridiculous. It's like he's rolling around in a steampunk stroller, a body-sized steampunk stroller. I wonder if Kiefer Sutherland still has that. Does he like walk around his house as a movie star in that steampunk stroller? Anyway, they try to destroy John Murdoch. John Murdoch destroys them. And then you have, because it's always nighttime, John Murdoch brings the sun up. So John Murdoch achieves apotheosis. He becomes a god of his own little flying spaceship. And it becomes a Gnostic apotheosis mythology of overcoming the Archons and the roughly Christian idea of who God is and what the incarnation is. So in many ways, it does accurately critique a synthetic worldview, synthetic materialistic consumerist world that we inhabit. But as usual with Hollywood, as Proyas himself, the director, says, it's a Gnostic telling of the story, and so things are inverted. So the strangers, we find out, were dying because they lacked the divine life spark, the soul. And so the humans possess the divine life spark within them. And once you come to that self-realization through the process of esoteric awakening, which happens to John Murdoch, you're going to be in the Matrix. You're going to be asleep. You're not woke, but John Murdoch gets woke. So there you have it. That's what Dark City is about. Includes all of the very interesting, weird, esoteric themes that we always cover. And if you like this analysis, give me your thoughts and comments below. Tell me what I missed. I'm sure I missed a lot of things. Give me a thumbs up and follow and subscribe. Also, you can get my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. Signed copies, part 1 and part 2, in the shop at Jay's Analysis. You can also subscribe for my full subscriber content through the links at my website or here on YouTube as well.